This is a pianola.
But underneath here, underneath this tape, there's a load of holes, and each hole connects to one of these pipes. These pipes go down to
the bellows under here, exactly. So the pedals here actuate the bellows, and the bellows drive these little mechanisms, which when pulled, activate the key here. So there's two methods you could activate this with auxiliary device, either by
Some kind of motor-controlled gate lifting system that converts the notes it's receiving into that motor system and lifts up to draw the air through into the right holes to trigger the right bellows that trigger the right keys. So that's the note coming in system.
The other option would be to bypass the entire bellows system and then add another system of activation down the bottom by actually intervening after the bellows and then pull these levers ourselves with a set of servos running across the bottom, each attached to one of these cables, which when activated triggers and pulls the hammer. We have some sort of sensor for every key, and then some activation that meant that when a key was depressed, the change in state here would activate the sensor here, and that would trigger a MIDI message that would trigger the activation system on the other piano. Yeah, you could use an infrared system that monitored like the distance between here and here changing
When it's off or on.
Or that you could use some sort of reflective surface that when the angle changed, the light no longer reflected perfectly into the sensor.
Pianos Connect. Let's go.
Connect, let's do it.
So right now we are working on the Pianos Connect input, which is using these LDRs here, these light dependent resistors. And the idea is that when a key is pressed, the amount of light on that resistor changes, so that gives us a trigger. That is then sent through an Arduino into a Raspberry Pi and then sent over a network virtually to another piano that then will trigger the output side, which is the solenoid firing. Basically, we were using photoresistors or light-dependent resistors, and that was working for the longest time, but when we came to upscale, there were a few complications with the circuitry, we think partly because the light-dependent resistors aren't super accurate and they have a really wide variable, so that was starting to skew. When we added more in, it was starting to affect the overall circuit, and the added complication with that is these multiplexers. Theoretically, we think that might have been adding an extra problem because they have quite a specific current limit as far as we can tell, and we think that maybe that's what was throwing things off. It basically meant we were getting really unpredictable results. Some keys were working, some weren't, and it was becoming really, really tricky the more we added to hone those in and figure out where the problems were and calibrate each one. So we think there probably might be a way to do that, but it was just taking us too long to figure out, so we decided to change approach, which is now we're using, essentially we've turned the keys into switches. So instead of the light-dependent resistors, they now have copper contacts. So when that is open, that's essentially like an open switch, and when it's closed, it's like a closed switch. And we're reading it in reverse, so when the switch is open, for us it means that the key is being played, and when it's closed it means the key is not being played, it's turned off. I press our lowest C, this one here. When I press it, you'll see that it'll get an on, and when it releases you'll get an off. On, off. original plan was for a solenoid to lift, and so there's an input and an output on both sides. But if you imagine on the other piano, these solenoids, when that key is pressed and the trigger is sent through by the resistor, on the other side it goes through all the computer gubbins and then tells the solenoid to fire on the right key. We may be having some problems with how much force these solenoids can lift and provide, so we've got some more on the way. We may do an alternative as a plan B. These are slightly smaller, lighter solenoids. The idea would be to use these directly on the strings instead. Hang these, or suspending them, or building an extra rail or something that we sit on. Is the circuit where all the key inputs are then connected to the Arduino, which is our microcontroller. You can see there's a lot of wiring that's only from 2 octaves. An Arduino is a microcontroller, so it's basically almost like a tiny little computer that has a range of inputs and output pins that you can use to read or sense data. You can code on it to convert that data into whatever you need. There's one Arduino for the input system for the key presses on this cabinet. There's another Arduino for the solenoids that handles the outputs, and both of them are plugged into the Raspberry Pi, and it's the Raspberry Pi that acts like the brain and controls the flow of data coming in and out and tells the Arduinos what to do with it, as well as talking to the other Raspberry Pi over a computer network. If I do 2 at once, C and E, D sharp.
D sharp, yep.
I'm doing
C1.
C and D sharp.
That'd be a fun test if we could get some sound coming out of it.
Careful.
Grand reveal. Pianola Nova.